So tonight, when we start our agenda or our meeting this evening, we're honored to have a couple of distinguished guests, Supervisor Cindy Gustafson and Mayor Pro Tem Trinity Burris. And so I'll turn it over to them to say some introductory remarks.
Cindy, you want to go ahead and go first?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Trinity. Thank you so much. I think most of you know me. I'm the supervisor for the 5th district that represents the area of Colfax all the way up Auburn, all the way up through Tahoe. And I'm really happy to be here and welcome you for participating tonight. You know, traffic and congestion and these issues are some of the ones I hear the most about in my district, that and obviously fire. And so tonight, talking about transportation and in these areas, you're really going to have the opportunity to give us some guidance and some input on what's important to you. So I really am pleased you're participating tonight. Many of you already know that with the pandemic coming to a close, as we recover from that, traffic is returning, and there was no shortage of it even last summer in our recreation areas in and around our canyons and our foothill communities. And we need to act before it gets any worse, as we see the growth in not only Western Placer, but the whole Sacramento region and Bay Area region. Those folks are coming up the hill, and our quality of life is definitely impacted by that. So what can we do to be forward thinking and how we approach it? So I'm looking forward to hearing your input tonight, and thank you for participating. It's really an exciting process. I've already sat through one of these presentations down in the North Auburn area, and I think you'll find it really engaging and interactive, and really appreciate your time and interest in this really important subject for all of us. Thanks so much, Trinity, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Cindy, and I really appreciate everybody making the time to, put this presentation on and have this meeting for the little city of Colfax. We definitely hear a lot of feedback from the public, especially since we've gotten more engaged over social media and, this sort of virtual presence. And, this is just one meeting, but this isn't going to be the only opportunity to give feedback either. And I know that unfortunately there's a lot of people who couldn't accommodate the meeting this evening, but I just want to reassure everybody that this is not the only opportunity to give input. And, especially as we're moving from our winter months into our summer months, we're going to have a lot of change in what the feedback is and what the main priorities are. And so, I just want to make sure everybody understands that we are noting these things down, and this information is being communicated throughout the year. But these meetings are really great because it gives the community an opportunity to have that direct participation rather than a sort of third party, we're playing telephone and, trying to get things done. So we really appreciate everybody who was able to make it tonight. And, as we have more meetings in the future, we're hoping that we can kind of ramp up that public participation with more outreach.
Well, thank you, Cindy, and thank you, Trinity, for the introduction tonight. And yeah, just to emphasize, this is just one night of presentations tonight. As Supervisor Gustafson indicated, we still have a few more of these left throughout the county. So if a friend or relative or neighbor wants to couldn't come tonight and wants to tune in another night, just go to keepplacermoving.com and you'll see the remaining meetings. You'll also see the ability to see the recording of these meetings, as well as the PowerPoint presentation that you see tonight. We'd welcome you to you or your neighbors or your friends to take a look at that. And if you have questions, Kathleen and I would be happy to sit down and or to talk to you virtually for now, and hopefully sometime soon sit down and talk to you about these issues as well. So again, yes, tonight is not the end of all these presentations. So what we have in mind tonight, our agenda, if you will, if we can go to the next slide, are a number of topics related to transportation. So the first thing we're going to talk about is an update on traffic, kind of where, I mean, anecdotally, we all know that traffic has greatly increased as we've been coming out of the pandemic. But kind of where are we at with some of our key roadways? The second topic we're going to discuss tonight are impact fees and the role of builders in transportation. As to relate this to the city of Colfax, when somebody adds a house or when somebody adds a square foot of commercial space, they pay into an impact fee, and that impact fee is then used to pay for things either here in Colfax or somewhere else in the county to help pay for those improvements to transportation, to mitigate, if you will, the impacts of transportation. And we just wanted, it's a very complex topic, but we wanted to dissect it a little bit tonight and show you how it works, and also talk about our update of our traffic model or travel model for the whole county that's ongoing right now, which relates to all of this. We're then going to lastly take a look at what are the regional projects that are or priorities, if you will, that we have already here in the county and here in the Colfax area, in both the city of Colfax and the area surrounding Colfax. And what are some of those projects that both the city and the county are taking a look at, because we're all planning for transportation here, whether it's the city of Colfax or PCTPA or the county, but we want to know what your priorities, what you think is important in terms of those improvements, and we may have something either listed highly that you think is not a priority, or something that's listed as a lower priority that you think is a high priority, and we really want to hear from you, so that we have this input from the community, which is vitally important as we prioritize these projects and find ways to fund them. And then lastly, we, as I mentioned before, we have a Q&A section. So if you don't put your question in chat, or you think of it later in the presentations tonight, and you want to talk about it, or you just want to make a comment about something related to transportation, and we'll have an opportunity there. And then last but not least, we're trying to do our part to help one sector of the economy that was very much impacted by the pandemic, and that is our restaurant community. And so we're actually going to be having a raffle tonight to raffle off a $25 gift certificate for TJ's Roadhouse, a restaurant right here in the Colfax area. And so just kind of doing our part to encourage people to visit our restaurants as they recover from a very large impact to their operation and the families that run them. So that's our agenda tonight. I mentioned who I am, but we also have Kathleen Hanley. Actually, her name is not mentioned on the slide, but Kathleen is actually standing in for Aaron Hoyt, who's our senior planner on our staff. And Kathleen's going to be taking a couple of topics here tonight, as well as myself. We also have Danielle Wood, who is with our public relations firm, AIM Consulting, who's kind of running the logistics of tonight's meeting. So, and we are all available after tonight's meeting to talk to you, as well as your representatives from the Board of Supervisors and the City Council. And also we're joined here tonight, I think, by Wes Heathcock, who is your city manager for the Colfax, and any of us can be reached and are willing to discuss what we discuss here tonight. Before we do that, tell you a little bit about who we are. And so you're probably wondering, who is this strange agency called the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, and what the heck do they do? We have the longest name of any agency in the county, so we'll abbreviate and use the term PCTPA. But what we are is, we're not the county, we're not the city of Colfax, but we represent all the jurisdictions here in the county. We're a special district that was created about 30 years ago by the county and by the cities. And our board of directors includes one member from each of the cities and towns, and a couple members from the Board of Supervisors, and one public at-large member. And Trinity Burris is on our board of directors from the city of Colfax. And what we do and why we were created is we as it says, we plan for transportation. And so in other parts of the Sacramento region, the greater Sacramento area, they have a regional government that basically does the planning for transportation. But our county here was very much and continues to be very much in favor of local control. And so 30 years ago, Placer County had the choice of either letting somebody in, West Sacramento or Davis or Elk Grove tell us what to do in terms of where we spend our dollars and where we prioritize our roads and other modes of transportation. And we didn't want to do that. And so we formed our own district here in Placer County to do so. It's worked very well. We've been able to achieve lots of improvements throughout the county and help our cities achieve their goals, like the Colfax roundabout that we'll talk a little bit about tonight, or the Lincoln bypass, or the first improvements to the 8065 interchange. We've been able to implement those projects. And, I'll have to knock on wood here, but every single one of our projects that we've implemented throughout our 30-year history has come in on time and either on or under budget or ahead of schedule, I guess. A few of those have come in that. And so we have a very good track record of being good stewards of your taxpayer dollars. And we want to keep it that way. And how we do that is we do things ourselves here in Placer County, although we coordinate at a much larger level with other governments to make sure that because people drive from throughout the region and move throughout the region. And this next slide is case in point. We kind of, when we look outside of Placer County in terms of our planning geography, we actually plan with our neighboring agencies for the thing called the Northern California mega region. It's an economic region, which includes the Bay Area, the 6 counties of the Sacramento region, and then all the way up to Reno. And so when we plan our transportation, our interstate highways, our train systems, our trails, and our bike regional bike trails, we look at first this big mega region, because people are moving all the time throughout this region, whether they're driving up to Tahoe from the Bay Area or whether we're commuting, as we talked about earlier, to Sacramento County from Placer County. So we had first look at this big region. We then kind of look down to the greater Sacramento region, the 6 counties in the Sacramento metropolitan area, which is represented again by an organization called the Sacramento Area Council of Governments. And Trinity Burris, your Mayor Pro Tem, is actually a representative on that board as well. And then we focus down on Placer County. We have our own plan for transportation for Placer County. So we plan locally and we prioritize locally, but we also have to work with our neighbors to make sure that these regional systems for transportation work well. So as we move on to the next slide, we're going to first talk about, as I said, about traffic and travel trends, which is a fancy name for talking about traffic during COVID, because it changed significantly. And so I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen Hanley, associate planner on my staff, to talk a little bit about traffic.
Thanks, Mike. So as Mike mentioned, traffic and our ability to move around was impacted dramatically by the COVID-19 pandemic. But as the economy reopens, and especially in the last couple of months, as more folks are able to get back to work and get back to our regular lives, we're obviously starting to see our roads fill back up, and that has a big impact. So looking at this by the numbers, we can look at the overall here. So this is from a data firm called Replica, and this measures vehicle miles traveled on an average weekday by each resident. So as you can see, to the pandemic in March 2020, we averaged about 18 miles per resident per average weekday. And with the initial stay-at-home orders, a pretty significant drop to around 12. Then throughout the year, as shelter-in-place rules waxed and waned, we had some variation in the numbers. And then the steepest decline was in the 2 holiday shutdown periods in December and January, where we were at about half of our vehicle miles traveled from pre-pandemic. Since then, with vaccinations and the recovery this spring, we're back up again, but we're still down about 20% since March 2020 in terms of vehicle miles traveled per person. However, despite this still being down 20%, that looks really different on our highway facilities. So we're going to take a look at 2 facilities, Highway 49 and Interstate 80, and see how traffic has been impacted over the last couple of years here. So first, looking at Highway 49. So the graph on the left shows traffic volumes, the number of vehicles that are on the road and time of day across here. So our current year, 2021, is in blue, and then the COVID year, 2020, is in red, and gray, which is sort of slightly hidden by the red here, is 2019. So as you can see, our traffic volumes on Highway 49 are still down pretty significantly from both 2019 and 2020. And in fact, Highway 49 saw really little difference during the pandemic on its traffic volumes. For those of you who travel on Highway 49 regularly or even incidentally, the construction ongoing that Caltrans is conducting on Highway 49 is of course impacting traffic. So even though traffic volumes are down, we're still experiencing a significant amount of congestion during that construction period. And this has an impact on speeds. So that's sort of traditionally when we see the volumes still down, we usually see higher speeds. As you can see, the 2021 speeds are still sort of around where they were and even slightly below in the early morning times due to some lane closures with the construction. If we take a look at Interstate 80, so this graph shows traffic volumes in both the eastbound and westbound directions. So on the left, we're looking at eastbound. You can see that 2021, we're still pretty far below in the AM peak, the morning time, with lots of folks still working at home. But the afternoon and the midday is really starting to approach not just 2020 levels, but actually 2019 levels. And traffic has certainly returned. And then if we look at the westbound direction, that afternoon is really actually very close. And in some cases, on some days, we're really starting to see the 2021 numbers start to surpass. So folks are back on the roads, even though many people are still working from home, they're certainly utilizing our facilities, and that congestion is definitely back. How this impacts in speeds is that we can see the 2021 number caps up on top and pretty much all times of day in both the eastbound and westbound directions on Interstate 80. Due to the decreased volume of folks on the roads, folks are driving faster. CHP has seen a significant increase in the number of violations for high traffic speeds, and certainly a safety concern. So that it's something that we want to keep in mind and to remind folks that as they're getting back to work and getting out on the roads to continue to travel safely.
All right, thank you, Kathleen. Well, we'll move on to our next topic, which is impact fees and our travel model and how that plays into the whole funding of transportation here in Placer County and frankly in most jurisdictions in California. So, Kathleen, I'll turn it over to you again to start this discussion.
Great, thanks, Mike. So certainly when we're looking at funding transportation improvements, especially in a growing county like Placer, folks always have questions about builders and developing communities and how those contribute. So I'm going to go into traffic demand model and impact fees to hopefully provide everybody a better explanation about how these sort of more complicated systems come together to form the improvements that we need. So in Placer County, we have an entity called the South Placer Regional Transportation Authority, or I'll refer to it as SPARTA throughout the rest of this meeting. And so this entity is a collection of a JPA, a joint powers agreement between Lincoln, Rockland, Roseville, Placer County, and that's correct, okay, who all came together to look at forming regional improvements, and there is a traffic impact fee to collect these regional improvements, most of which are in the South County, but certainly residents of the foothills and folks farther up in the Sierras all definitely depend on our Interstate 80 and farther South County infrastructure in order to access opportunities and to just generally increase their quality of life. So what is a traffic impact fee? So regional fees are collected on new development. So with each house that's sold, there's a fee that's collected by the entity. And that fee accounts for the cost of that development's growth on impacting public infrastructure. So it works on it, if you break it, you fix it model, which means that if an existing facility is already congested and broken, new development doesn't necessarily pay for the cost of the existing congestion and issues on the infrastructure. They pay for the difference that they'll account for with their new growth. And all of these impact fees are highly regulated by states and federal case law, and they're extremely detailed. In fact, the next slide details the requirements of the Mitigation Fee Act, which I'm not going to go into details, But in short, essentially what needs to happen with traffic impact fees is identifying deficiencies in our transportation infrastructure as it is, and what will be deficiencies in the future as the county continues to grow, and to use that information to determine what the fair share is for each developer, and to develop a traffic model that helps illustrate how the deficiencies will be created and how new infrastructure improvements will mitigate those needs. And all of this is really set out in a really prescribed legal format. It's almost like filing your taxes. It's an accounting exercise in terms of who exactly pays for what for each individual change. So it's all very technical. So if we look at what is a traffic demand model, essentially a traffic demand model has three parts: transportation options, travel patterns, and land use assumptions. So in the transportation options, this takes a look at what is our existing infrastructure and what are the planned improvements over the life of the model. And then for travel patterns, this is where we input destinations and models of different travel options, and also trip lengths. So this is where assumptions into how we think people will travel starts to play a big role in terms of where the jobs will be, where the growth will be, what changing preferences will have an effect. And then there's the land use assumption. So this is where the traffic model takes into account all the general plans of each of the jurisdictions and other state and regional plans in terms of where different types of uses will be allocated and at what quantity. And as you can see with this illustration, each of these are shown as gears. So as you sort of alter one slight part of any of these inputs, the model responds and illustrates these differences. So if we take a look at what a model looks like, so this is sort of aerial footage, Google Maps of a part of South Placer. So if you can imagine the traffic demand model overlaying on top of this aerial, both the land uses that are existing and planned, and you can see the different colors showing where there's residential and where there's commercial and where there's more housing, a university, and then the addition of segments where the infrastructure is and what the properties of that infrastructure is. So the model takes into account sort of how many lanes are planned there, what additions would be, and really builds out the whole system. And then it doesn't just include our highway infrastructure, it also includes our trails and bike lanes and transit routes. So it takes into account all of the various types of transportation infrastructure that we have. Okay, so if we look at attributing the need, how it would work in a case. So this is an example. So let's say a new building community that's coming online. So you can see the existing on the left here. There is no segment between there. And then shown on the right, this is where how the traffic demand model looks on the back end. So these blue blocks here indicate where the new road would be built. And then the shading of the existing road segments illustrate what would happen to adjacent facilities. So on the red facilities, those are ones that would experience increased traffic volumes as a result of the creation of the new road. And the blue ones show which traffic segments would, the green ones show which traffic segments would experience lower traffic volumes as a result of the new road. So when you look at allocating the fee for this example project, you have to take a look at what is the existing traffic level on that facility in comparison to what its designed capacity is for, and then the future traffic that's created by the building. So the orange part is the only part that the development, the building community would be responsible for. They're not responsible for the existing traffic on the facility.
To kind of finish off the topic of impact fees and the costs of development, we have this $3 billion need, and so it's a very large number, and it pays for, again, everything from county roads all the way up to big things like the 8065 interchange. And the building community does play a significant role in that, and they should. That is appropriate, and very much like most other communities in California and in Placer. Of that, if you take that same formula and apply that to that $3 billion need, about $2 billion out of the $3 billion is paid for by development. And again, development is the reason that our communities grow, and they do pay for a very large portion of that. We have some of the highest transportation impact fees in the entire Sacramento region, and rightly so, because they help us a lot in paying for what we need. But unfortunately, there's a little slight bit of an issue. And that's because what has happened as areas grow, and the state and the federal government are faced with unprecedented growth throughout California, as we're approaching 40 million people here in California, and the great growth throughout the region, throughout the nation, presented us a challenge. And that challenge is, when we planned our community, when we did our general plans, whether it's for Colfax or whether it's for Auburn or Roseville, we planned our communities based upon a formula for funding transportation that dates all the way back to the Eisenhower administration and was valid all up until about 12 to 15 years ago. And that formula was, especially for regional roadways, if we as the local government came up with 10% of the cost through impact fees or other mechanisms, the state and the federal government would typically pick up 80 to 90% of the cost of that. So we planned our communities in our general plans based upon that formula, and they're now growing, and we're implementing the growth of those general plans. Well, about 10 to 12 years or 12 to 15 years ago, things changed, and not for the better. And although legally, we still have to come up with 10%. What bears relation right now is competition, because these funds are now scarce. There's not enough money to go around. And so in order to secure funding at the state or federal government, in order to get that, you now have to come up with dollar for dollar or half of the funding. And what that has done is that's created this gap, this $1 billion gap that we have to find a source of funding for. And it's very difficult. And we're not going to talk a little bit too much about how we're going to fill that gap tonight. But the state leaves us very, very few ways to do that. But just the point here is that we have a problem here in Placer County. And again, the other 57 counties have the same exact problem, is we have a gap in how we pay for transportation, because the old model of the 90-10 rule is no longer in effect, because we can't compete against other counties that have adopted things like transportation sales tax measures. So we come up against them all the time. And we simply can't compete in order to get those state or federal dollars. So as we move on to the next slide, we're going to talk. I'm sorry. One of the things that people immediately ask about then is something that we just passed here in California a few years ago. They said, well, wait a minute. What do you mean we don't have a way to fund our roads? We just passed this thing called the gas tax, or we increased the gas tax, or a thing called SB1. And its formal name, the Road Repair and Accountability Act, a number of years ago. Isn't this supposed to pay for our roads and our needs for transportation? Well, the answer is half yes. And the half of the answer is the state took about 15 years to wrangle and decide, to find a way to pay for this through the gas tax. But what they didn't address is they did not address the fact that the state was growing. And so they were able to come up with a very good source of funding for fixing what we have already. And so fixing the potholes, fixing the roads, to, reconstructing our roads, replacing our transit buses that drive almost 1 million miles in their lifetime, fixing pedestrian safety issues, dealing a little bit with local congestion, but SB1 only pays for the very, very most congested areas of our state around our seaports at LA and Long Beach and Oakland. But it doesn't give any money for things that we need here in Placer County, like the 80-65 interchange, or widening 65, or projects right here in Colfax or other parts of the county. It doesn't pay for any expansion. And that's a big problem, because we're essentially on our own to come up with that source of funding. And again, very important that we fix what we have, but it would have been very nice, like most states, if the state of California had also come up with a way to fund our growing needs here in Placer County and throughout the state. So the gas tax, unfortunately, is not our answer for our expansion needs. So, before we get going here tonight on going through our priorities, I just wanted to maybe highlight, some examples of what what would happen if we did have funding for our projects. And so we have a couple of projects right here in the county that we were able to secure some funding for of recent. And again, I just want to use these for illustrative purposes to show you what would happen if we didn't have those dollars. The first project, or the main one, I guess, if you will, in Placer County of recent was a multimodal funding project down on the I-80 corridor, essentially from Roseville and Rockland down to the light rail station at Watt Avenue. We were able to essentially fund a number of improvements, a new bus line from Lincoln to the hospitals in Roseville and down to the light rail station. We were able to get funding for 2 choke points along Interstate 80, 2 of the last little bottlenecks along that route, very important. Fund some things for the Creek Greenway in Roseville, and then a bunch of projects in Sacramento County. And how we funded this was we got lucky, and we essentially, because we partnered with Sacramento County, who has a transportation sales tax in place. We were able to utilize their matching funds because they overmatched or over contributed towards their projects, and therefore our projects could kind of, if you will, kind of go along for the ride and got funded as well. So again, case in point here, if you have a local funding measure in place, you can secure significant funding. In this case, Placer County got about $30 or $40 million in funding from this grant that we applied for again, but we did it kind of on the backs of Sacramento County, helped us out in this situation. So, and here's, probably the most important project for Placer County, these 2 choke points, which is a 5th lane, if you will, from in the westbound direction from Douglas to Riverside, and then also an additional lane in the eastbound direction between the interchange at 65 and 80 to Rockland Road, which pre-pandemic would clog up quite a bit because of students trying to enter and exit from Sierra College. So very, very important project to the county, and luckily we were able to ride on the coattails of Sacramento County to get this funded. So what I want to talk about from here forward is kind of what our priority projects are. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the south part of the county because we're up here in Colfax. And so I want to spend a little more time on Colfax itself. But just to mention, because, as Kathleen explained in her presentation, a lot of people spend a lot of time down in the south part of the county. And so we have some big major projects down there. The 8065 interchange that we just completed the first phase of. We have another 3 phases of that $500 million project to go. We need to widen 65 from Lincoln to Roseville. I mentioned we did get funding for these auxiliary lanes that in the last grant. We need to expand Baseline Road from Roseville west to Highway 99, and actually we're going to build a new roadway called Placer Parkway from the Whitney Ranch off ramp in Rockland all the way over to Highway 99. Very, very important projects for the economy and for South Placer County in order for people and goods to move through there. We have almost $2 million per hour, $5 million per hour that moves through that area every day. So very important for goods and services as well. But I wanted to spend most of tonight talking about things up here in Colfax and the Colfax area projects. And the slide that you have in front of you, these are projects that come from the Capital Improvement Program for the town of Colfax and for the county. And as you see, we have a number of key projects here, some of which are in the process of being implemented. The Colfax Roundabout project was a pivotal project here in Colfax that we worked very closely with the city of Colfax, Caltrans, and our agency. And this is a case where we actually even had to borrow dollars from our other agencies to make this project a reality, and it's a game changer for Colfax. The state routinely uses this as a example of where a few dollars can really help a local town, and so very pivotal to the economic development plans, if you will, for the town of Colfax. But we have a lot of other projects to go. The Bunch Creek Trail, a new trail from that roundabout area to the downtown parts of Colfax. Improvements throughout Colfax with the CDBG road rehab project. A great need to work on streetscaping for the downtown area of Colfax, and some other road improvements along South Auburn Street and Whitcomb Avenue in terms of both pedestrian and road improvements. And then in the county, the greater area surrounding Colfax, and this expands out greatly to the greater area of the central part of the county. There is a great need on some of our county roads, and I won't go through every one of these, but you know, there's on all of these roadways, there's a need to improve, you know, where there's curves that are not as safe, where shoulders need to be widened for safety reasons, where we need to replace some bridges like the Yankee Jim's Bridge. Very, very important projects here in the eastern, what is termed Placer East, in the county's capital improvement program, and all these projects are needed. Certainly, we need the interstate highways and the regional highways that we talked about earlier. But really, in this part of the county, we need these roadways for people to get to and from their homes, people to get to and from their work, or to get to and from recreation, which is such an important part of the Colfax area. So certainly we need to find ways to fund these projects right here in this area. And then as we move on, you know, we've talked a lot about roadways and paying for roadways and impact fees for roadways, but we also have other modes of transportation that is also very important. Our local bicycle and trails networks, the town or the city of Colfax has a bicycle master plan that it worked with PCTPA a number of years ago to develop, and this is the map on the left shows you the planned pedestrian and bicycle routes here in the town of Colfax. And then regionally, as we look at the eastern part of Placer County, the county is in the middle of developing its new pedestrian trails master plan, and again, some very important trail systems to reach some of the most beautiful parts of our area here in the central and eastern part of Placer County. And so we work very hard with Colfax and with the county to try to find sources of funding for these networks. We head to the next slide. And then what we're trying to do is so we go from the local to the regional. So it's important certainly to connect or to build our bicycle trails within our communities, but we're trying to create, you know, viable ways to connect these networks together. So things, you know, trying to connect, you know, Auburn to the south part of the county. So we have a connective bicycle network here in Placer County so that people can use this either as a recreational asset for the county, which has been so well utilized during the pandemic, or a commute alternative. And we have lots of systems or lots of plans in place to connect our communities together where they don't now exist. And then the next slide looks at gaps. And so as you look at Colfax, or as you look at Roseville, or look at Auburn, it doesn't matter what the community is, we have a bunch of what I would term disjointed systems. And so we take opportunities to build our bicycle and pedestrian facilities, you know, essentially where development occurs. And then what we try to do is then fill in the gaps. And you know, a lot of folks think that, well, you know, it must be easier to build a bicycle trail than it is to build a roadway. Well, sometimes, but most of the time, it's actually just as difficult because, as you know, we like to have these trail systems, whether they're for pedestrians or bicycles, in some of the more beautiful parts of our communities, maybe along creeks or along other scenic byways. And you know, certainly in those areas, there's much greater potential environmental impacts and it makes those projects difficult. We also have to work a lot of times with private property owners. Sometimes these trails need to cross a piece of private property, and that's certainly in most cases a very complex discussion with that property owner, if they're willing to work with us to try to connect those trail systems. So we spend a lot of times in what are calling filling in the gaps in these facilities. And here's just a map of one part of the county that shows those gaps. So we work with our jurisdictions to try to fund those gaps. So we're not always just building one nice big trail. And then the last slide here in terms of our regional trail systems, and we have a number of those in the county as illustrated by the prior slide, but we're also trying to build, what could be someday, world-class facilities. Everybody's heard of the American River Bike Trail, which goes from Folsom Lake all the way to downtown Sacramento. A lot of people don't know that we're trying to build our version of that here in Placer County, which would connect the northern part of the Sacramento Valley to the American River Bike Trail system via a thing called the Creek Greenway. And we've just started the construction of that in Roseville, going eastward to Granite Bay and Folsom Lake, and then westward out through the county. So hopefully someday this is going to be something that every person in Placer County can enjoy, not just those down in Roseville, but all the way up here in Colfax and the rural parts of our community can utilize these facilities, just like the 2.1 million people that utilize the American River Bike Trail do now. The next thing I'll talk about, or I guess the last thing I'll talk about here tonight, is transit. And so we have 3 local transit systems here in Placer County. We have Placer County Transit, which connects our rural parts of our community and our towns and our cities together. We have Auburn Transit, which fulfills transit service in the city of Auburn, and then we have Roseville Transit down in the southern parts, or in Roseville specifically. And transit is very challenging here in Placer County, and especially when it comes to our rural communities like Colfax, it's very, very expensive and sometimes even virtually impossible to run transit effectively to our community. So even towns or even cities like Roseville and Lincoln, because they're communities which are spread out. They're not high density communities like San Francisco and Chicago, and even communities like Dallas, that you could run a transit line very effectively in the downtown parts of that. We're very spread out, and so it's very difficult for us to connect or to provide service in many parts of the county. But we do our best, and where we can add service, we do. If we go to the next slide. One of the things that is very successful in terms of transit here in Placer County is our commuter buses. And so, if you were to what's called park and ride to one of the facilities in Auburn, like the Auburn train station, you can then pick up a commuter bus from the Auburn train station that would take you all the way down to the light rail station or down to downtown Sacramento, which is one of the largest employment areas of our region. And these buses were so popular that actually, if you didn't get on the first stop, like Auburn or wherever one of these starts, we had, before the pandemic, we had standing room only to get on these buses. So very, very successful, and we're looking at expanding these in the future. And then we have the last part of our transit service is the door-to-door services, and we have dial-a-ride services in our 3 communities: Roseville, Placer County Transit, and Auburn. And then we have something that's actually it used to be called My Rides. We just changed the name of it to Placer Rides, and this is available countywide to be able to supply rides to medical transportation. So for those that don't have a means to get to their doctor's appointments, right here in Colfax, we will actually reimburse someone the cost of their friend or relative taking them to their doctor's appointment in other parts of the county, or even down into Sacramento County. A very much needed service, but something that we have for residents here in Placer County, including the Colfax area. And then we're also looking at some innovative projects, which are called, in some of our larger communities, called Microtransit, where we're replacing the big transit buses with sometimes with smaller vans or cutaway buses that can be called on demand to pick them up and go to and from their where they need to go. And so we're looking at some of that stuff here in Placer as well. And the problem with transit is we've seen a very precipitous decline over the last 10 years, and this is due to a number of factors. Not only it is very easy to own a car. You can finance either a new or a used car for almost 8 to 10 years now, and with $0 down. And so it's very easy to use a car, and people have chosen not to use transit. But as I mentioned earlier, a lot of times transit doesn't go where people need to go. And so we're reconfiguring our transit systems, especially as we come out of the pandemic, to look at things like microtransit and other things that are more effective of getting people to where they want to go. And then the last part of our transit system is our capital corridor service. So these are the Amtrak trains that go from Auburn down to Sacramento, and then into the Bay Area, and eventually down to San Jose. To Silicon Valley. This is prior to the pandemic, the third most popular intercity rail system in the entire United States. Was growing by leaps and bounds, and certainly a lot of Placer folks use that service. You could park and ride at the Auburn train station. We have a very large lot adjacent to that, and people would drive their car to that lot from Colfax or wherever, and be able to take the train down there. But the sad part is that we only have one train a day, and so we're looking at expanding that. And initially, we're going to expand that to Roseville, and I wish I could say we were expanding it up to Auburn or even up to Colfax. But the people that own the rail line is a company you all know, which is Union Pacific Railroad, and they get to say who gets to use that rail line. And so initially, we're going to be expanding it to Roseville only. And so instead of one train, it's going to be three daily trains, and then the second phase of that project is to expand it to 10 daily trains. We do have bus service, which you've seen the Amtrak Thruway bus service, which connects to our communities in the eastern part of the county, and also gives you access to more trips through the Sacramento Valley station. But this would give us more train trips to Placer County. And our hope long term in working with Union Pacific Railroad is that we can expand that service so that we get more train trips up to Auburn, and maybe someday up to the Colfax area. This does not include the Zephyr, which does stop once a day in each direction in Colfax, which provides service from Oakland to Chicago. But this is the Capital Corridor service. And again, our hope is to expand this so at least people in the rural parts of our county can use it as a park and ride facility to Auburn, and drop their car off at Auburn and then take that railway down into the Bay Area, either for their jobs or for an excursion or some type of pleasure trip down to the Bay Area. David. We wanted to just take this time to thank you for coming tonight, and why don't we turn it back over to Supervisor Gustafson and Mayor Pro Tem Burris to give us some parting comments.
Cindy, I'll let you
thanks, Trinity. I was just going to thank everyone who participated, and Mike and your team. What a great job. I think it's such a difficult topic to talk about all these issues and the long range planning and the massive amount of infrastructure we really need to start addressing these issues. And I know it gets sometimes overwhelming, but you've really brought it down to a grassroots opportunity for people to weigh in. And I really appreciate that. And I love the suggestions, and we should work together, Trinity, and what we can do, and with more and more of these micromass transit shuttles that we're looking at both in North Shore of Lake Tahoe as well as in Auburn, and what we can do in other recreation areas too. So thanks everyone for participating, and do share the future dates of these meetings. There's, I think, 1 or 2 left Mike, that people could attend. And I think that, you know, wherever you live in the county, it's great to hear kind of the snapshot of how many people are really working on transportation issues, because it does affect our quality of life and our well-being. So thanks so much.
Yeah, and I just want to tack on to there too, you know, thank you again for everybody who was able to join us tonight. And, you know, I want to reemphasize, like I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, I understand that, you know, not everybody was able to make the meeting tonight, but as a city, at least, we're working really hard on trying to get the word out there more for these types of meetings and these different partnerships we have with other agencies, and very proactively get information out to the public. So, you know, if you have any suggestions or anything like that, feel free to reach out to me directly as well. And, you know, I'm happy to pass along that feedback or work with you any way we can to try to make sure the public has as much access to transparency as possible. But yeah, no, and I wanted to just double check. I'll get with Kathleen after the meeting as well to make sure that, you know, at least from our city Facebook page and stuff like that, we can make sure that people have access to this meeting if they want to go back and watch it, or, you know, look at the slide deck or anything like that. So if friends, neighbors, anybody wasn't able to attend tonight, we don't want you to feel left out.
Great. Thank you again, Cindy and Trinity, and everybody for attending tonight. Kathleen put at the bottom of the chat box the keepplacermoving.com website address, and that's where, again, all these meeting videos and the slide deck is located at, and we will work with Colfax to try to get that on the city's website as well, so, or on the city's Facebook site as well. Anyway, thank you all for coming. Appreciate your input, and yes, we actually have another 3 meetings left, so check it out if you or somebody else would like to come and by going to our website. All right, take care, everybody.